Welcome to another deep dive with My Mind MashUps. We're really glad you could join us.
Great to be diving in again.
Today, we're going to try and untangle something pretty complex. The world of addiction.
Yeah, and it's not just, substances like drugs or alcohol we're talking about.
Exactly. We're also looking at behaviors, things that can get just as deeply ingrained. We've gone through a lot of research for this one.
We have. We're looking at everything from, the official definitions
Right, the diagnostic criteria.
to what's actually happening inside our brains during cravings.
And even how society's views, the stigma, can really affect someone's path to recovery.
Definitely. Our goal today really is to give you, the learner, a clear picture, make it engaging, highlight some maybe surprising facts.
Without totally overwhelming you with jargon.
Exactly. We want to connect the dots between different ideas.
Okay, so here's what's on the agenda. We'll look at how our understanding of addiction is, expanding.
Yeah, to things like gaming, even shopping. We'll touch on the DSM and ICD classifications for those.
Then something I found really fascinating. The similarities in the brain between addiction cravings and, basic survival drives. Hunger, for instance.
It's pretty striking, and we'll explore how our environment, our surroundings, can be powerful triggers.
Right. What does that mean for recovery? And we'll pinpoint those key brain areas involved the insula.
The insula, the amygdala, and the striatum.
Yep.
How they sort of talk to each other.
We also have to touch on the psychological side. Defenses like denial, rationalization.
How they can kind of fuel the fire, keep it going.
Plus, we'll tackle some of those persistent public myths about addiction and why they're so damaging.
But it's not all grim. We'll
Right.
definitely get into the hopeful science of neuroplasticity.
Ah, yes. The brain's ability to actually rewire itself during recovery. That's huge.
It really is. And we'll also look at the role of shame and secrecy, how they impact substance use disorders.
And finally, we'll try to give a general timeline for brain recovery, how long it might take, looking at different substances.
And touch on tolerance, too, why people need more over time.
Okay, sounds like a packed dive. Should be some aha moments in there.
Well, let's hope so. Okay, so this evolving understanding, it's really shifted, hasn't it? Beyond just physical stuff.
Yeah, for ages it was all about, alcohol, drugs, physical dependence.
Right, but now there's this growing recognition that certain behaviors can hijack the same systems.
You mean like a compulsion to do something rewarding, even if it's causing problems?
Precisely. And biologically, psychologically, there's a lot of overlap with substance addictions.
So are we really saying things like, excessive gaming or compulsive shopping? They're in the same kind of category as alcohol dependence.
Well, the official guidebooks are certainly moving that way. The DSM-5, the big diagnostic manual in the U.S.
Right.
It took a major step by classifying gambling disorder as the first official non-substance addiction.
Ah, okay. Gambling first.
Yeah. It was a recognition that those brain reward pathways can get just as messed up by behaviors. The DSM-5 also flagged internet gaming disorder, but more as a condition for further study.
So needing more research for gaming, but gambling was more definite. Why the difference back then?
It really came down to the strength of the evidence at the time the DSM-5 was being put together. For gambling, the research base was considered more robust, meeting their specific criteria.
Okay.
For other things like compulsive shopping or sex addiction, there were clinical observations, sure, but maybe not quite the same volume of rigorous data they needed for a full formal diagnosis then.
But that was a few years ago. Hasn't the needle moved since? I thought I heard about an international system.
Yes, absolutely. The ICD-11, the World Health Organization system, has taken a broader stance.
Okay, what does that say?
It formally includes both gambling disorder and gaming disorder now, under a heading like disorders due to addictive behaviors.
So gaming's officially in there now, too.
It is. The ICD-11 defines gaming disorder by things like impaired control over gaming, giving it priority over everything else.
Life interest activity.
Exactly. And continuing even when negative things are happening because of it. And typically, that pattern needs to be obvious for at least, say, a year.
A whole year of that kind of impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds serious. What about the other behaviors, though? Shopping, exercise? Are they getting closer to being formally recognized, too?
Research is definitely pushing forward.
Yeah.
Compulsive buying, for example, studies are finding links to dopamine receptor variation.
Dopamine, the reward chemical.
Right. And increased activity in brain areas like the orbitofrontal cortex when people see shopping cues.
Yeah.
Similar patterns to substance cravings. And what used to be called sex addiction, now often termed compulsive sexual behavior disorder, that's also in the ICD-11 now. Again, it's about inhibition inability to control intense urges leading to repetitive behavior despite harm.
And exercise. Can that really be an addiction?
It's being studied seriously. Researchers have proposed criteria, things like tolerance needing more and more exercise for the same feeling and withdrawal symptoms if you stop.
Like feeling irritable or anxious.
Exactly. And potential links to endorphins, dopamine, maybe similar pathways to opioids, some researchers think.
Wow. It really broadens the whole concept, doesn't it? It makes it seem less about the specific thing and more about the process in the brain.
You've nailed it.
Yeah.
And that leads perfectly into our next point, which is just fascinating.
Mm.
The parallels between these intense addiction urges and our most basic drives, like survival drives.
Okay, yeah, this is where I was really intrigued. I always thought of addiction as, I don't know, something separate, almost unnatural. But you're saying there are brain links to things like hunger.
The neurobiology is surprisingly similar in some ways. Studies using fMRI brain scans have shown that feeling really isolated socially
Right.
and being deprived of food, they actually light up the same core area in the midbrain. It's called the SNVTA region.
That's NVTA. Okay. What does that part do?
Think of it as a central hub for motivation and reward, deep in the brain. So craving social connection after isolation and craving food after fasting, they trigger similar activity right there.
That's wild. So on some level, the brain craving a drug feels similar to the brain needing food.
In terms of the underlying drive, yes. Dr. Nora Volkow at NetAda talks about how addictive substances essentially hijack those dopamine pathways.
The ones that evolved to keep us alive.
Exactly. They make the drug craving feel just as vital, just as urgent as hunger. There's also this idea, the incentive sensitization theory,
Okay.
which suggests addiction really ramps up the wanting, that intense dopamine-fueled desire more than the actual liking or pleasure, just like survival drives make us want essentials.
So it's that powerful push to seek it out, like when you're starving and just have to find food.
Precisely. And another brain bit, the insula, we mentioned it earlier, it's key for translating body signals into feeling.
Like that gut feeling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it plays a big role in both drug cravings and hunger. Both can create that really visceral, urgent feeling via the insula.
And didn't you mention something about damage to the insula?
Yes, some striking studies showed that damage there, maybe from a stroke, could sometimes just eliminate cravings. Smokers suddenly found the urge gone.
Wow. That really pins down its importance.
Mm.
What about the flip side? The bad feelings when you don't get what you crave, like withdrawal. Do survival drives have that too?
They absolutely do. Withdrawal from addictive stuff activates stress chemicals like CRF, dynorphin in a region called the extended amygdala.
Okay, the amygdala involved in emotion.
Right. And this creates this awful feeling, unease, dissatisfaction, sometimes called hypercataphia. It's a bit like the awful feeling of starvation.
So that negative feeling drives you back to using, just like hunger pangs drive you to eat.
Exactly. It's negative reinforcement. You seek the substance or behavior to make the bad feeling stop.
It's like our basic seeking system, the one meant to find food and water. It gets misdirected. Hijacked.
That's a great way to put it. The brain's seeking system, heavily reliant on that dopamine pathway, gets locked onto the addictive thing.
Yeah.
It can lead to this loss of functional autonomy,
Meaning?
meaning your focus just narrows right down onto that compulsive habit, almost like how survival needs push everything else aside.
So the brain mechanics share similarities with survival, but the outcome is totally different. Survival drives keep us alive. Addiction harms us.
Precisely. Addiction is a pathological takeover of those circuits. But understanding this overlap, it can actually help develop treatments, aiming to recalibrate that reward system.
Makes sense. Okay, now you also mentioned earlier how our environment can be a massive trigger for cravings. How does that work in the brain?
Oh, massively. Environmental cues can powerfully reactivate those brain circuits linked to drug seeking. Think places, people, even objects.
So just walking past a specific bar you used to go to could set off a craving.
Absolutely. That's called context-induced reinstatement. The hippocampus, our memory center for places and events, is crucial here.
It links the place to the substance.
Very strongly. Even after being abstinent for a while, going back to those places can reignite the urge. Animal studies show this really clearly.
What about other kinds of cues? Not just places.
Objects associated with use paraphernalia, like needles, pipes, or even a specific glass, can be direct triggers. They can cause dopamine surges in reward areas like the nucleus accumbens.
Wow.
And social cues are huge. Being around friends who are using, or just being in environments where use is normal, that dramatically increases relapse risk.
Peer influence, yeah. Always powerful.
Definitely. And surprisingly, Even isolation can be a trigger for some, maybe in rural areas with less support. Feelings of isolation can actually increase cravings sometime.
Mm. And family stuff.
Plays a critical role. Chaotic or traumatic home environments, especially growing up, are strongly linked to higher risks for addiction later on.
It sounds like stress ties into all of this too, how we react to cues when we're stressed.
Big time. Stress definitely amps up our sensitivity to these cues. Stress hormones like CRF and norepinephrine.
The fight or flight ones.
Yeah, they can intensify the craving experience when you encounter a trigger. Research shows stress can bring back drug-seeking behavior even after it seemed extinguished. There's a lot of neurochemical overlap between stress pathways and drug cue pathways, especially in that extended amygdala region.
So if someone's going through a really stressful period lost job, relationship issues, they're much more vulnerable if they run into old triggers.
Exactly right. Stress lowers the threshold, especially if there's a history of trauma. The interaction between stress and cues is a real challenge for maintaining recovery.
This really highlights how important managing triggers is. What helps? What are the strategies?
Well, there's environmental modification, basically, of actively avoiding those high-risk places and situations. Sometimes even moving to a sober living home can make a huge difference.
Reducing that constant exposure.
Right. Then there are therapies. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is key, especially something called cue exposure therapy.
What's that?
It involves being gradually and safely exposed to triggers in a controlled way, like in a therapist's office, to help weaken that automatic condition response over time.
Retraining the brain's reaction.
Exactly. Mindfulness-based relapse prevention is another one, helping people become more aware of cravings and manage their reactions in the moment without automatically acting on them.
Learning to ride the wave? Sort of.
Sort of, yeah. And there are some medications being explored too, like N-acetylcysteine, which might help balance glutamate levels and reduce cue reactivity.
Glutamate, another brain chemical.
Yep. And even newer things like neuromodulation using TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, to target brain areas like the prefrontal cortex.
Trying to boost impulse control directly.
That's the idea, trying to strengthen that top-down control over the craving signals. It's really a multi-pronged approach: environment, therapy, sometimes medication.
Fascinating. Okay, let's zoom in on those brain regions you flagged earlier. The insula, amygdala, and striatum. What are their specific jobs when a craving hits?
Right. These three form a core network driving that craving experience. The insula, as we touched on, is critical for interoception, sensing your internal body state.
That gut feeling again.
Exactly. Brain scans consistently showed the insula lights up when people experience cue-induced cravings, and the more it lights up, generally, the stronger the craving feels.
And those lesion studies you mentioned, people losing the urge to smoke.
Yeah, really striking. Damage to the insula, and suddenly the craving was just gone, as if the body forgot the urge, as some reported. It really shows how the insula translates those body signals into that conscious feeling of wanting.
Incredible. Okay, what about the amygdala, the emotion center?
The amygdala, especially a part called the central nucleus, handles the emotional, stress-related side of craving. Researchers have even found specific neurons there. Some seem to inhibit craving after voluntary abstinence, while others seem to drive craving after forced abstinence. In humans, more amygdala activity when seeing drug cues usually means stronger craving, often fueled by those stress chemicals, CRF, dynorphin, linking it to the negative feelings of withdrawal.
So the amygdala makes the craving feel emotionally charged, maybe anxious, especially when withdrawing.
Precisely. Abstinence can ramp up CRF in the amygdala, boosting anxiety and relapse risk. Interestingly, some drugs, like alcohol, can temporarily dampen this amygdala hyperactivity.
Which might be why some people use it to cope with anxiety or trauma.
That's one theory, yes. It provides temporary relief from that hyperarousal.
And the third one, the striatum. I link that with reward and habits.
You got it. Two key parts here.
Yeah.
The dorsal striatum, crucial for habits like automatic drug seeking,
Right.
and the ventral striatum, including the nucleus accumbens, which is more about predicting rewards. Drug cues trigger dopamine bursts, especially in the dorsal part, and that strengthens the craving.
And over time, it shifts more towards habit.
Exactly. Chronic use often shifts control from the goal-directed ventral striatum to the more automatic, habitual dorsal striatum. So you keep using compulsively, even if it's causing huge problems, even if the pleasure isn't really there anymore. It's become automatic.
And there can be physical changes there, too.
Yes, structural changes. Alcohol use disorder, for example, has been linked to reduced volume in the nucleus accumbens and disrupted connections between the decision-making parts of the brain, the orbitofrontal cortex, and the striatum.
Making it harder to weigh consequences properly.
Exactly. Impairs the evaluation of rewards and risks.
So these three, insula, amygdala, striatum, they're constantly interacting, creating this craving loop.
It's like a cascade. A cue might activate the insula, triggering that body memory of using. That creates the conscious urge.
Go ahead.
Stress or negative feelings activate the amygdala, amplifying the urge with emotion and releasing stress chemicals. This buzz in the insula and amygdala can then trigger dopamine surges in the dorsal striatum, reinforcing the habit pathway and maybe overriding the prefrontal cortex's attempt to say no.
The rational control gets bypassed.
Potentially, yes. And if the communication between the decision-making cortex and the reward prediction striatum is off, decisions get biased towards immediate gratification using the drug despite knowing the long-term costs.
Wow, the really complex interplay. Okay, shifting slightly, let's talk psychological defenses. Denial and rationalization. Why are they so common and powerful in addiction?
They're incredibly powerful because they shield the person from the immense emotional pain of fully facing their addiction. They distort reality, twist thinking, so the behavior can continue without confronting the awful truth.
It's basically avoiding reality.
Fundamentally, yes. Denial is refusing to acknowledge the problem exists or how severe it is, maybe rejecting evidence, minimizing consequences.
It's not that bad. I only drink on weekends.
Exactly. Or even forgetting bad things that happened while intoxicated, a kind of selective memory.
Minimizing seems really common.
Very. And rationalization is making up excuses, blaming stress, saying everyone does it, promising to change later.
I needed to relax. I had a hard day. I can stop whenever I want.
Classic rationalizations. These have deep roots in psychology. Psychodynamic theory sees them as protecting the ego from guilt and shame.
Okay.
Object relations might see the addiction as filling an emotional void, and rationalization maintains the illusion you're in control of it.
And what about cognitive dissonance? How does that fit?
That's a really useful lens, too. When your behavior, like using substances, destructively clashes with your self-image, maybe you see yourself as responsible, it creates mental discomfort.
Right, that tension.
To reduce that tension, instead of changing the behavior, you might change your thoughts about it. Rationalize it, minimize the conflict. It's not really hurting anyone. This job is just too stressful right now.
So you change the thinking, not the action.
Yeah. Exactly. And there's a brain basis for this too. Problems in the prefrontal cortex, common in addiction, can impair self-assessment, making it easier to maintain denial.
Harder to see yourself accurately.
Right. And the reward circuits being overactive makes the drug seem incredibly important, overriding rational thought. Dopamine surges reinforce the denial, making the substance feel essential, like survival.
Dopamine again.
Yep. And the shift to habitual behavior in the dorsal striatum also bypasses careful evaluation. Plus, the amygdala's fear of withdrawal feeds denial, avoiding the bad feelings.
It's a tangled web, psychologically and neurologically. How does this mess with treatment?
Huge barrier. Strong denial means people resist even admitting there is a problem. They're way more likely to drop out of treatment early.
Right.
And even if they stay, if those underlying rationalizations aren't tackled, the risk of relapse later is much higher.
So therapy needs to address these head-on.
Absolutely. CBT helps challenge those distorted thoughts, test reality. Motivational interviewing is great too. It avoids confrontation, helps people see the gap between their actions and their own goals.
Gently guiding them towards recognizing the problem themselves.
Exactly. Reduces defensiveness. There's even research into things like N-acetylcysteine, possibly reducing craving-driven rationalizations, or TMS boosting prefrontal activity to improve insight.
It sounds like a really delicate but essential part of recovery, getting past those mental roadblocks.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about public perception. There are still so many myths about addiction out there, aren't there?
Oh, definitely. And these misconceptions fuel stigma, discrimination, make it harder for people to get help. One of the biggest is that addiction is just a choice, a moral failing, a lack of willpower.
Yeah, you hear that all the time. Why don't they just stop?
But it's so much more complex. It's biology, genetics, trauma history, environmental stress, actual changes in brain chemistry.
We've been talking about those brain changes.
Right. Brain scans show reduced gray matter in the prefrontal cortex impacting impulse control. Changes in dopamine sensitivity. It undermines free will. in that context.
So it's not simply choosing to continue using.
Not at all. Another myth. Only hard drugs are addictive. Heroin, cocaine.
Right.
That ignores the huge impact of prescription opioids, alcohol, even cannabis for some people, and behavioral addictions like gambling. They hit the same reward pathways.
And the stereotype of what someone with addiction looks like.
Yeah, the stereotype of someone homeless, unemployed, it's incredibly harmful because it makes us miss addiction in people who are high functioning, holding down jobs, raising
Right,
families.
it exists across all demographics.
Absolutely. Statistics show plenty of employed people struggle with substance use disorders. Those stereotypes lead to a false sense of, that could never be me.
Or my friend, or my family member.
Exactly. Then there's the myth that treatment doesn't work because relapse rates are high.
People see relapse as failure.
But relapse rates for addiction are similar to other chronic illnesses like hypertension, diabetes, asthma. Relapse means the treatment needs adjusting, not that the person failed or treatment itself is useless.
That's a really important reframing. Relapse is part of managing a chronic condition.
It often is. Good treatments, CBT, medication-assisted treatment, really do improve long-term outcomes significantly. And another one, willpower is enough.
Just tough it out.
Again, ignoring the brain changes that impair self-control. And for some substances, like alcohol or benzos, quitting cold turkey without medical help is actually dangerous.
It can be life-threatening.
Yes. So relying only on willpower isn't just ineffective, it can be unsafe. And this myth fuels stigma. They should just try harder. That stigma is a massive barrier to people seeking help.
All these myths seem to feed into shame and judgment.
They really do. Society often judges it morally, as weakness instead of a medical condition. This leads to real discrimination jobs, housing which isolates people more.
And makes recovery harder.
Much harder. Sadly, even some healthcare providers can hold stigmatizing views, maybe about medication-assisted treatment. And that internalized shame stops people asking for the help they need.
So how do we fight these misconceptions? What actually works?
Education is crucial. Framing it accurately as a brain disease, but always emphasizing that recovery is possible, that reduces blame, builds empathy.
How addiction is portrayed in media matters too.
Hugely. We need more balanced, nuanced stories, not just harmful stereotypes. Policy changes help too, expanding access to treatment, reducing criminalization that fights structural stigma.
And community support.
Vital. Peer support groups, family therapy, they reduce isolation. Even employers can help with supportive workplace policies, focusing on help, not punishment. The big goal is shifting perception from moral failing to treatable medical condition.
That shift seems key. Okay, let's move to something really positive, neuroplasticity. The brain's ability to heal and rewire itself in recovery. Tell us about that.
It's truly remarkable. Neuroplasticity is just the brain's ability to reorganize itself based on experience, learning, even injury. Addiction actually hijacks this process to strengthen drug pathways.
Making the addiction stronger.
Right. But that same capacity for change can be harnessed during recovery to restore function, cognitive control, emotional regulation.
So the brain changes from addiction aren't set in stone. They can be reversed.
Not necessarily permanent, no. Addiction causes maladaptive changes like those dopamine surges, strengthening cue reward links through long-term potentiation, making pathways super efficient.
Okay.
And it reduces gray matter in the prefrontal cortex, impairing executive function. But when someone stops using, the brain starts normalizing. That drug-induced potentiation can be reversed by long-term depression, weakening those connections.
So the brain starts pruning back those addiction pathways.
Exactly. And it starts restoring levels of things like BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which helps stabilize synapses and supports new learning.
What about neurogenesis? Growing new brain cells, does that happen?
Yes, especially in the hippocampus key for memory and learning. Chronic drug use can suppress new neuron growth there, which might make it harder to extinguish those drug cue memories.
The triggers we talked about.
Right, but things like exercise, enriched environments, they can promote hippocampal neurogenesis. This helps cognitive recovery and reduces drug seeking. We also see white matter repair in the prefrontal cortex, improving communication between brain areas needed for self-control.
So what kind of recovery approaches tap into this neuroplasticity?
Well, mindfulness therapies are a great example. They've been shown to reduce the amygdala's reactivity to cravings.
Calming that emotional urgency.
Yes, while strengthening the prefrontal cortex's ability to manage them. Brain scans even show regular mindfulness can increase gray matter in areas for self-awareness and emotional regulation.
Wow. And exercise.
Also incredibly powerful. Helps normalize dopamine, reduces excessive glutamate linked to craving, boosts that BDNF we mentioned. It helps weaken the drug memories.
And standard therapy like CBT.
CBT helps restructure those negative thought patterns, which physically weakens the drug-related neural pathways and strengthens pathways linked to healthier coping skills in the prefrontal cortex.
So therapy is literally helping rewire the brain.
It absolutely is. And some medications work on these principles too. N-acetylcysteine helping balance glutamate. Others being studied target specific receptors like D3 antagonists to try and calm overactive reward circuits.
It's really encouraging, isn't it? That inherent capacity for healing.
Ah,
Okay, let's pivot to another crucial piece. Shame and secrecy. How do they fuel addiction?
They create this really vicious, self-perpetuating cycle. Shame, secrecy.
Uh-huh.
They distort self-perception, cut people off from support, and end up reinforcing the very behavior they're trying to hide.
You mentioned shame. Is that different from guilt?
Very important distinction. Shame is global about the self. I am bad. I'm flawed. Brain-wise, it activates regions linked to self-focus and deep distress. In addiction, it's often tied to less prefrontal control and more amygdala reactivity, more emotional pain.
And guilt.
Guilt is usually about a specific action. I did something bad. While guilt can motivate change, in addiction, it can curdle into self-blame, maybe even justifying more substance use as self-punishment.
So shame feels deeper, more about your core identity. How does that lead to secrecy?
Because shame is so painful, people hide their substance use desperately to avoid judgment. They compartmentalize, wear masks, isolate themselves.
To stop anyone finding out.
Right. But the secrecy itself fuels the addiction. It cuts off social support, which is vital, and it's exhausting. Managing secrets drains the mental energy needed for self-control.
It sounds incredibly lonely.
Yeah.
Trapped. How does the cycle escalate?
Substance use often leads to actions that trigger more shame, maybe due to consequences or just societal stigma. That crushing shame then drives more substance use as a way to numb the feeling.
A really destructive feedback loop.
Totally. Brain imaging even shows that people prone to shame have more reward center activity when shown drug cues. Shame literally fuels the urge.
And societal stigma pours fuel on that fire.
Absolutely. External judgment reinforces internal shame. Discrimination makes people feel worthless, think, why bother trying to recover? It makes them terrified to seek help, fearing rejection.
So breaking the cycle means tackling both internal shame and external stigma. What helps?
Therapies like shame resilience training help process those feelings. Group therapy is huge for normalizing experiences, reducing isolation. Motivational interviewing can reframe guilt constructively.
Okay.
Medications that reduce craving intensity, naltrexone, NAC, can help indirectly by reducing behaviors that trigger shame. And societally, we need language reform, person-first language.
Person with a substance use disorder, not addict.
Exactly. And public education campaigns focusing on addiction as a treatable condition, fostering empathy.
It really sounds like moving from hiding and shame towards self-compassion and connection. Okay, finally, let's talk recovery timelines. How long does it take for the brain to heal, generally?
It's really variable. Depends on the substance, how long and how much was used, overall health, the treatment received, lots of factors. But we can sketch out some general stages.
Okay, what happens right at the beginning when someone quits?
In acute withdrawal, the first days to weeks, the brain starts rebalancing chemicals. Dopamine starts stabilizing, though the timing varies by drug. Stress hormones start coming down.
And then after that initial phase,
Early abstinence, maybe the first 1 to 3 months, you start seeing early signs of structural recovery, especially in the prefrontal areas. Gray matter volume might begin improving. White matter tracts, the communication highways, show early repair signs too.
what about a bit further down the road, say 3 months to a year?
That's protracted abstinence. More significant recovery can happen then. For stimulants, dopamine transporters can recover substantially. Gray matter continues normalizing in prefrontal and cingulate cortex areas for self-control, emotion regulation.
And cognition improves.
Yeah.
Cravings reduce.
Generally, yes. White matter connectivity gets more robust, often linked to better attention, decision-making, fewer cravings. For opioids, white matter repair in frontal regions is often seen in this phase.
And long term, after a year or more.
Long-term recovery, yeah. Structural restoration continues. People with past alcohol use disorder might get near normal brain volumes after several years sober. Neurogenesis in the hippocampus can be boosted by lifestyle changes like exercise.
Helping memory and mood.
Right. But it's crucial to remember it is often a long process. Full recovery can take months, even years. The brain's plasticity is amazing, but healing takes time.
You said it varies by substance. Any big differences?
Some general patterns. Alcohol. Gray matter recovery can start relatively fast, within a month maybe, but full restoration might take years. Stimulants. Dopamine transporter recovery, often significant within the first year, gray matter too. Opioids. That frontal white matter recovery within the first year seems linked to reduced cravings.
And what makes recovery faster or slower for an individual?
Duration and severity of use is big, longer, heavier use often means slower recovery. Age and physical health matter younger, healthier folks often bounce back quicker.
Makes sense.
And the interventions are absolutely key. Medications help rebalance chemicals. Therapies like CBT and mindfulness strengthen regulation, build coping skills. Lifestyle helps too. Exercise, nutrition, sleep the fort. They all support neuroplasticity.
So it really is a journey needing a whole package of support for the brain's healing.
Exactly. And even with healing, challenges can persist for a while, like anhedonia trouble feeling pleasure, or emotional regulation difficulties. Cognitive issues might linger in severe cases. It highlights why ongoing support is so important for long-term well-being.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does it all mean? We've gone deep into addiction today, seeing it's more than substances, how it taps into basic brain drives, the role of psychology, society. It's complex.
It really is. And think about some key things. That brain region, the insula, crucial for both drug cravings and feeling hungry. Or the fact that relapse rates are similar to other chronic illnesses, that changes how we should view recovery. Right?
Yeah, less is failure, more is part of management.
Exactly. And maybe the most hopeful point, neuroplasticity. The brain can heal, it can rewire. That offers real potential for change.
We really hope this deep dive gave you some useful insights, maybe spark some new thinking about addiction. What stood out most to you? Any questions still buzzing around? This is definitely just scratching the surface.
It really is. And hey, if you found this valuable, please do like, share, and subscribe, or follow My Mind MashUps wherever you listen.
You can find us on Amazon Music, Audible, Facebook, Pocket Casts, Spotify, and YouTube.
We'd love to keep unpacking more knowledge with you. Thanks for joining us.